Great. Thanks, Haley, and thanks everybody for joining today. We wanted to take a little bit of a different approach to the content for this webinar and contrast a lot of the large vendors that we cover on an ongoing basis in the cloud space, leaders in terms of their size and impact on the market, and look at some of the smaller, largely pure play providers that have found a niche to grow and expand very rapidly and have an impact on the market in a more nuanced way, but still one that impacts the competitive landscape and addresses the changing needs of customers. And so we'll contrast some of the large vendors in the markets they play in with some of those vendors that we don't always cover to the same level of depth. And we've organized that by a number of different kind of functional spaces. And so we'll start with looking at the data management, data warehousing market for cloud solutions, and look at both the role of the large vendors as well as some of the smaller providers that are growing in terms of their reputation and adoption amongst customers. The second market we'll look at is the containerization management, Kubernetes management space, and Alex will talk about some of the top tier platforms as well as the smaller ones. I'll go into some of what we're seeing in terms of the security needs for customers and how it's not only being met by some of the large cloud platforms and hyperscale providers, but also the ecosystem of smaller vendors and the approaches that they're taking to sustain growth and potentially overlap a bit with some of the larger players and have an impact on the market in that way. And then Evan will cover some of the smaller providers in the SaaS space, as well as how they're working in terms of within ecosystems around some of these large providers, how they're making decisions around those types of alliances and the platforms on which they actually run. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Katie to take us into the first market view.
Great. Thank you, Alan, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. So as Alan mentioned, we're covering a range of topics and workloads as part of this webinar, but wanted to kick off the discussion looking at some of the platform layer workloads and how some of the smaller, more targeted vendors are disrupting the market, not just in how they partner with the hyperscalers and tap into that broad base to really unlock new revenue channels, but also the role they're playing in kind of filling gaps in where maybe the hyperscalers are lacking in terms of capabilities as part of their own native PaaS services, and really the role of positioning, these smaller platforms, perhaps that are less general purpose, but really do get to the heart of customers' specific workload and specific industry use case. So on this slide, we pulled this from our semi-annual Cloud Infrastructure and Platforms Benchmark, and this is a view of the vendors that we currently cover in the report, and just wanted to highlight the revenue and growth picture that we've modeled out for 2Q22. And, of course, you see the big three in the top quadrant there that are driving a lot of the attention, largely from an infrastructure perspective, but we also touch on several of what we consider pure play PaaS vendors that are shaping the market and driving a lot of growth because of customers' need for that degree of customization and nuance as it pertains to their business. And so when we talk about PaaS, of course, it's a broad array of workloads that a lot of these vendors specialize in, whether it's Boomi in integration or what have you. But regardless, it's still about, working with the hyperscalers to offer customers those capabilities in a hybrid multi-cloud fashion. So I just want to touch upon one of the key spaces we're looking at in the broader PaaS market, and that's data management. That's something that's really only become more and more important with the rise of multi-cloud, and we know by now that's the ideal scenario for a lot of customers. But the customers that we do talk to, they're really looking for ways to better manage data across platforms and across different architectures without compromising on the security and governance. And that's a real challenge. And I think for a lot of them, in some ways they're hesitant to move to the cloud because of that. And so they're still navigating these fractured, dispersed data silos, which come with their own host of cost and efficiency challenges. And so as a result of the macroeconomic conditions we're dealing with right now, down the road, I think we'll see customers invest in a more comprehensive approach to data and to data management, whether that's establishing like a data warehouse that not only aggregates the data, but pulls it from your CRM system, your ERP system, so you can perform analytics, or even perhaps a more mature approach like a data fabric. So just to call out a couple of vendors in the space, you'll see Informatica on the chart here. They have really pivoted their strategy with the cloud, essentially replacing their intelligent data platform with the Informatica Data Management Cloud, or IDMC. And with that, they offer all these different modules, whether that's integration or catalog or governance, and all on top of the core platform to give customers that kind of pick and choose flexibility without compromising on the core technology. And so I think that approach is really resonating with customers, particularly from a multi-cloud perspective and from a skills perspective. So these comprehensive end-to-end solutions like IDMC, have that common interface, and that goes a long way in helping customers actually scale their data teams across the different clouds. And so in 2Q, they had a really strong quarter. Cloud ARR was up over 40%, and I think we'll continue to see the momentum there, especially as they strengthen their relationships with the top hyperscalers to help get those legacy data warehouse workloads to the cloud. And really, like anything in the PaaS market, and we'll touch upon this later too, there's going to be sort of that competitive overlap between the infrastructure as a service partners and the pure play PaaS vendors. So there's a degree of risk there, but of course it's really a better together story. And the big hyperscalers at the end of the day are just concerned with driving up consumption for their core infrastructure services, and so Informatica plays a really big role as a partner to make that happen. IBM is another important call out as well, particularly with their data fabric solution, which has really grown synonymous with their Cloud Pak for Data product. And of course, they're still committed to supporting, the legacy data warehouses and databases, but we see them really leading with their data fabric solution for those integrated capabilities, whether that's automated governance or cataloging, to simplify kind of the data management lifecycle. And a key part of the IBM strategy too is joining that with the consulting business to help customers achieve that, because one of the holdups we find in a business that keeps them from being data-led or data-driven is just the cultural aspect coming from the top. So kind of combining the tech and the consulting expertise to help clients overcome that. And lastly, another key data management player that we haven't yet included in this benchmark, but that we're closely monitoring, is Cloudera. We see them as an example of a disruptor in the space, really with their Cloudera Data Platform, or CDP. And that's essentially a turnkey service that we see kind of going beyond some of the limitations of a data lake architecture, and see them trying to lead with this more flexible approach, the architecture that's in a domain and close to the data source, and really tries to get to the core of the problem that many clients are facing, and that's really rewriting applications. So if a customer wants to write like a machine learning workload on AWS, but then move it to Azure, in theory, they can do that with some degree of ease with an architecture like Cloudera. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense, at least at a high level, as to some of the vendors and the topics that we continue to explore as part of TBR's infrastructure and platforms coverage, including, taking a deeper dive into the data management space. So with that, Alex, I'm going to pass it off to you to touch on some of the disruptors in containerization and security.
Great. Thank you, Katie, and hello, everybody. So just turning to slide 6, as we begin talking about containerization and Kubernetes engines, I think it's helpful to start with where the containerization market is today in terms of market awareness for many of the major players. On the left side, you'll see the results from TBR's recent customer survey for the first half of 2022, which really shows the mindshare lead that the native platforms offered by the largest public cloud providers control. And so while there's certainly some notable pure play platforms, which I would also know is a bit of a misnomer given that these vendors are pretty active in a lot of other product areas, these pure play platforms are really trailing the likes of AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And really what that comes down to is what you could call the native platform advantage. It's simply faster and simpler for an enterprise customer to spin up a new container and run containers on these native platforms. And simplicity is a pretty common theme when we are talking to customers about buying decisions around Kubernetes. Kubernetes, by its nature, is very resource intensive, especially if you are planning on managing it internally, which we do tend to see a lot of interest in managed service options. And so given this resource intensity, simplicity is really a massive driver for buying decisions. And when you're considering which platform to go with, a lot of customers are opting to go the native route, given that this is typically going to be integrated and more accessible through their infrastructure as a service provider. Turning to slide 7, containerization pure plays are continuing to see significant growth despite the ease that comes with native platforms. And this really is being driven by their status as a vendor neutral and vendor agnostic provider. These pure plays have a lot to offer enterprises, especially in terms of multi-cloud capabilities. And as multi-cloud capabilities grow in interest with the growth and maturity of multi-cloud environments, we would expect that the mind share and the market share for these vendor neutral providers to go up as well. Multi-cloud enterprise customers are really focused on avoiding vendor lock-in, and they're continuing to look for different ways to diversify the technology vendors that they work with and optimize their ability to deploy across different public clouds. While large public cloud providers, specifically Azure and Google Cloud, are supportive of multi-cloud deployments, the vendor neutral and vendor agnostic platforms are at a minimum perceived as more multi-cloud friendly relative to these native platforms. And further, when we talk about AWS, their platform, EKS Anywhere, today does not support multi-cloud deployment and just recently began to support on-premise deployment. So there is this sense in the market of favoritism towards the infrastructure provider's platform that I think steers a lot of these enterprise customers looking for the optimal multi-cloud experience. It really steers them towards the vendor neutral platform. On the pure play side, when we talk about multi-cloud function and the ability to deploy anywhere, this really has been standardized. Both Red Hat and VMware are leveraging their Kubernetes offerings to position themselves at the Kubernetes control plane. And when I say control plane, it really extends past just purely the Kubernetes control plane and is taking on a new meaning of looking at multi-cloud management and the multi-cloud control plane. At VMware Explore, VMware's recent event, the company was very forthcoming and made a number of large assertions around their ambitions to establish itself as a broad multi-cloud management provider through its new ARIA portfolio. And this portfolio weaves together its Kubernetes engine, the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, and its Kubernetes control plane, mission control, with their more legacy virtualization platforms, trying to create an all-in-one workload management control plane with capabilities that span modern and legacy deployment methods, which really goes into why when we talk about the pure play containerization providers that we cover, it's a bit of a misnomer, because a big part of what we're seeing is these companies like Red Hat and VMware trying to leverage their legacy and their other platforms in order to really develop themselves at the control plane and differentiate by offering a top-notch multi-cloud management, top-notch multi-cloud Kubernetes deployment option while layering it in with other parts of their portfolio. When we talk about Red Hat, much like VMware, this company has a Kubernetes control plane, which is IBM Cloud Satellite, which offers support for multi-cloud and distributed compute environments. One of the things with Red Hat that it's looking to use as a differentiator is its presence in operating systems. Red Hat has been fairly successful in commercializing Linux through Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and TBR really views the control plane as a platform that is becoming increasingly commoditized and eventually will be layered into the operating system. So eventually Red Hat will likely look to really layer this Kubernetes management infrastructure along with its enterprise Linux, offering customers a easy way of managing their Kubernetes along with the rest of the stack. And turning back to the large public cloud providers, while the pure plays do offer a different experience in terms of preventing vendor lock-in and at least the perception of a optimal multi-cloud deployment option, the containerization management customer is still really concerned with a few externalities outside of purely multi-cloud management. So while the pure plays will likely continue to see market share gains as multi-cloud becomes more relevant, ultimately it is unlikely to change the overall market dynamics. As you'll see on the right of slide 8, security functionality and DevOps functionality and price all ranked as larger priorities and larger concerns for customers when selecting a multi-cloud management solution. In all these areas, TBR believes that the large public cloud providers like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud are better suited to layer on these additional security functions and DevOps functions relative to the smaller players, just based on the breadth of their internally developed portfolios and their ability to offer third-party ISV solutions to their customers. So they really are able to provide more in the terms of optionality. And when we look at how the pure plays are responding to that, they're typically relying on partnering to bring in these additional capabilities. VMware, a big example would be their work with NVIDIA, which has been pretty broad-based, but focusing on containerization, working with NVIDIA to bring NVIDIA's AI enterprise suite to Tanzu, which brings developer tools focused on AI. When we look at a company like AWS, these solutions and these developer tools are able to be offered more natively and internally through AWS's solutions, and that just ultimately will allow AWS to be more competitive in terms of container management and being able to offer this higher level of security DevOps functionality. And the same can be said for security and price as well. When we think about AWS, the company has really been a leader in its ability to work with customers around price and work to reduce platform costs for customers, which it does a lot through its ability to drive better price performance in its infrastructure, which it continues to pass on to its customers. So as we think about the pure plays, there's certainly a lot for them to do in terms of seizing the opportunity in multi-cloud. Red Hat will continue to try to leverage its position of the operating systems to the best of its advantage, but there's a lot of other factors that are really supporting the infrastructure as a service providers, Kubernetes platforms that are likely to really keep the current market dynamics fairly stable with only incremental market share gains and disruption coming from a lot of the pure plays. With that, I will pass it on to Evan, or Alan, who will be discussing security pure plays.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so with this, we'll look at an aspect that we cover a couple different ways, really just from different angles with the portfolio. We don't do a lot of dedicated coverage of the competitive space for cloud security. But as we kind of start in with the role it plays in cloud overall, here we have feedback from our customer study about, just to orient you, this is a selection of the top pain points for cloud environments as reported by adopters earlier this year. And so it's ranked from top to bottom in terms of the most seen, experienced pain points for customers in regards to their cloud environments. And you can notice that security is at the very top, which it's been really throughout the studies that we've done, most cited in terms of, especially as customers are moving things that are not just test and dev, not public websites, those types of things, marketing sites, but real integral workloads to their environments. Security is all of the risks associated with those have followed those workloads to the cloud. Also interesting to note, we asked about the data location and privacy as a separate option, and that's right just below security more generally. So those two really, I think, are interrelated. And when we look at some of the vendor approaches, you'll see that it's tough to look at just one or the other. It really is an overall kind of data protection, security, compliance set of requirements that are very important for customers, especially really over the past 2 years, as they've adopted core mission critical workloads, things in the ERP set of sub workloads that have a lot of sensitive data and are very important for the ongoing operations of a business. Those obviously heighten the need to look at security more deeply and not just look at cloud as a way to save money or move low priority workloads. And so with that in mind, one of the things that I think drives, or just going back to that slide for one more second. So in addition to the top to bottom, we also asked folks about the way that they plan to address these pain points and requirements. And so a couple notable things about security overall is that if you look at the first bar, that's folks that are planning to have a third party or some type of automation help them address that. And so for security, it's kind of, it's at the top, aside from the bar at the bottom, which is less frequently cited. So a lot of folks looking for external help to help automate and to offload some of the requirements around security best practices and the solutions that help ensure the security of environments. The second bar is folks that plan to address it with internal resources, and that's actually the smallest of all the options, of all the pain points that we noted. Most frequently when we talk with people and do interviews with folks in IT leadership for enterprises, it's incredibly difficult and expensive to both find as well as keep security expertise within their badge staff. And so, I think that's only gotten more pronounced over the last couple of years since the pandemic, where there's a big influx of remote working, increased security risk. It was already a shortage, and I think that's only been amplified. And so looking for firms that can kind of consolidate some security expertise, have the peace of mind that that they'll be able to provide that, which I think to large part they've been more successful keeping some of those skills on staff from kind of an outsourced consultant perspective. That's been more of a model that, especially for if you're not the largest enterprise, if you're not really at the top of the pay scale for a lot of these skills, it's a challenge because it's a big, there's really strong competition for security skills and cloud security skills, especially in today's environment. And so not a lot of folks realizing that doing it all themselves in terms of security and data privacy is going to be a challenge long term. And then the last segment of the bar is looking to some of the cloud providers themselves in terms of enhanced capabilities. So it's really kind of more evenly mixed for security than most of the other pain points and challenges that folks note in terms of their cloud adoption. And so we'll go a little bit deeper here and talk about, in terms of the ways to address it, we have two of those major ways laid out here. One from the cloud platform providers themselves in terms of the offerings and best practices and assurances that they're able to build into the delivery of the offerings themselves. And then also some of those smaller vendors in the strategies they're taking to capitalize on customer demand for third-party solutions outside of what they're actually consuming from a platform and infrastructure and software as a service perspective, and their strategy in terms of growing and disrupting and becoming a bigger part of customers' environments as a result. So if we start with the cloud platform vendors, the major three, the approach that they've taken, really I think a lot of these strategies mimic their overall approach with the cloud business. So Google, very focused on the enabling multi-cloud, standing out from some of the more established providers who are a little bit more focused on kind of locked in, looking at their own platform capabilities. And so that's carried over into the security realm. A number of acquisitions, most notably the Mandiant acquisition, which just closed within the last month or so, and focused on a tool set and a set of offerings that not only secure the Google Cloud environments, but extend out to the other major platforms and other delivery methods. It's really trying to take a broad approach, and I think acquiring some of those capabilities from outside only supports that, because pre-acquisition, they're really looking at a broad set of capabilities that cross multiple different cloud environments to maximize their addressable market, as well as cater to stand out from just cloud native capabilities. I think AWS, as we note here, is the most internal focused. Mimics what they've been doing with hybrid cloud, which is really just AWS consumed in multiple different ways, in large part, and they've taken the same approach with security. So Google's the furthest on the other end of the spectrum, taking a broad approach, securing, really offering solutions that can secure multiple different environments outside of Google's own properties. Microsoft has seen, really in general with security, a tremendous change in terms of the capabilities as well as the perception that they offer to customers. So it ties into not only their broader cloud strategy, but their broader strategy in general, even on the traditional software side, to invest in security capabilities that are noted from U.S. government. Other governments look to them for security feedback and guidance. And so I think that's been a tremendous shift and change for them. And they're really kind of in the middle of AWS and Google in terms of the strategy with cloud security, where a lot of independent offerings that they've added support for AWS and Google in terms of a lot of the core security offerings in their portfolio over the last couple of years. And so, yeah, not only securing the platform itself, but being a more general purpose security set of products is definitely something that they've been addressing and offering to customers more recently. And then in terms of the pure play space, long list of really interesting vendors. We've picked out just a couple here with Cloudflare and Datadog. I think the statement around Cloudflare, part of it may be boasting in terms of their addressable market, but I think it speaks to the growing breadth of what they have in terms of products and services today that span not only security, but more general purpose, cloud storage, database, some of those PaaS offerings starting to overlap a bit with the cloud platforms themselves. And I think they're a good indicator of where some of these security vendors could look to expand into. And it's really, they're using the opposite strategy of the big cloud providers, which provide the core services and then to some degree add on security capabilities as a complement to that. And in some ways to advance sales cycles, to address customer due diligence and requirements around the ways that workloads can be secured as they're deployed on cloud platforms. These pure plays are coming from the opposite end of the spectrum to say we'll provide the core security tool set and then also move into capabilities that address specific use cases and go beyond just security in some ways to more general IT tasks and requirements. And so Cloudflare, obviously there's, you can take some of that with a grain of salt, but I think it speaks to the general strategy of broadening the addressable market to sustain the growth, because we do expect cloud security to grow faster than the cloud services themselves, that general cloud infrastructure platform software as a service market. And we've already seen some slowdown in terms of some of the growth in the last few quarters with the macroeconomic conditions shifting a bit and, just the effects of scale on some of these businesses. Cloud security, I think, is going to be much more resilient and important area of investment given the continued threats and risks that these environments face. And so I think it'll be more durable. And then with Datadog, again, so these are just a handful of smaller vendors, but, already at a $2 billion annual run rate or approaching that, still growing in the mid double digits for revenue expansion. And when we look at the strategy behind that, again, I think there's indicators of where the security market and some of these pure play vendors are going to be focused around things like DevOps, specific use cases where they can enable a secure business function, IT function, and cater it to the use case, the industry. Again, some of those broader themes of industry customization, specialization, are carrying down into the security realms as well. So I think that's ways that they're going to evolve the portfolios. And then the disruption that we think is really part of the pure play strategy here is that multi-cloud approach. So catering to all the big services that run on the big cloud platforms, using that as, even though Google and Microsoft do provide things that can operate in multiple different environments, there is a desire and a need on behalf of a lot of customers to divorce themselves in some ways to being totally tied into a single platform, a single provider. That's not only for the underlying service, but also for the security, which is pretty clear. Customers that's really their responsibility. And I think they feel that and don't want to put all of their eggs in one basket by standardizing on not just a cloud platform for their IT workloads, but also for the security environment. I think that's part of what gives this pure play ecosystem of security vendors more runway to grow and evolve their businesses in the coming year and beyond. So with that, I'll hand it over to Evan.
Thank you, Alan, and hello to all of you on the line today. So far in today's webinar, we've spent time talking through the opportunity presented to incumbents and startups alike as it pertains to arenas like data management, containerization, and security. To close out the webinar, I'm going to spend some time looking at the emerging applications opportunity for leaders and upstarts alike through the lens of the various workload segments. In short, the opportunity for ISV startups across the application ecosystem is vast, but the opportunity and required strategy to capture it is far from uniform, dependent on the market segment in which an ISV resides, be it sales and marketing, HR, or business applications. One of the primary drivers of this reality is the uneven state of enterprise's SaaS maturity across front and back office workloads. Consider the sales and marketing domain. Today, SaaS CRM workloads are heavily adopted by customers. In the earlier days of the SaaS CRM market, most customers' implementation strategies were lifted and shipped, replacing existing on-premise systems with cloud alternatives from the likes of Salesforce. Moving the system of record to cloud provided multiple outcomes to an organization. It allowed them to use data solutions like cleansing, matching, or deduplication to enhance their vital client information, in turn providing the relevant shareholders in their supported systems with better data to conduct their day-to-day sales and marketing efforts. The value of modernizing a core system like CRM was clear, and as a result, adoption rapidly outpaced workload counterparts like ERP or HR, where lift-shift migrations are not really realistic given the complexity of these systems and the number of business processes which have been customized around them over time. When I first came into the industry over a decade ago, Salesforce was still only viewed as a disruptor to the on-premise front office workload arena. On-premise incumbents like Oracle and SAP saw the threat, but they responded too late to it. And as some of you may remember, Oracle itself used to say cloud was quote-unquote water vapor before finally jumping aboard. And today, a once cloud startup is now the de facto leader in the SaaS front office. This year in particular, Salesforce achieved an impressive milestone, eclipsing SAP in 1Q22 as the largest enterprise application provider in terms of both on-premise license and SaaS revenue. Salesforce's success, of course, extends far beyond just CRM. The company, since its inception, recognized the value of leveraging ISV ecosystems to augment their core IP. Over time, Salesforce acquired leading partners from that App Exchange ecosystem to continually broaden their share of client wallet, and then result in the launch of sales, marketing, commerce, and service clouds, while most recently acquiring Slack, setting its sights on the productivity and collaboration space, and subsequently launching Digital HQ to enable both enterprises' front office functions and their internal collaboration needs of the workforce. Given the rapid modernization of clients' front office environments, niche ISVs are able to seamlessly plug into cloud-native CRMs from the likes of Salesforce, servicing a discrete outcome for a client which goes beyond the scope of that incumbent proprietary catalog. As a result, the marketing technology player ecosystem has grown exponentially over the past 10 years. According to some industry estimates, as recently as 2020, the total player landscape was comprised of over 8,000 ISVs, compared to just under 2,000 as of in just 2015. While ISVs will be hard-pressed to disrupt an incumbent such as Salesforce, as a partner, they are presented with an ample install base to tout their value-add capabilities to, thus receiving greater support from Salesforce over time as they grow their joint revenue, be it through joint sales and marketing funding, or more critically, guidance from Salesforce on the partner's technology roadmaps to ensure alignment going forward with Salesforce's own roadmaps. If these players are strong enough too, they may just be the next acquisition candidate for a company like Salesforce. Just think back to what Salesforce did when they acquired Velocity last year and then subsequently launched the Salesforce Industries portfolio. Outside of sales and marketing, the dynamics are just different today. On-premise incumbents in business applications over the last year alone have enacted various initiatives, be it Rise with SAP or Oracle's SOAR program, to kind of accelerate that migration of on-premise clients to cloud or SaaS-enabled ERP systems. While adoption is most certainly strong today in ERP, with SAP reporting S/4HANA growth of over 90% on the latest earnings call, it most certainly pales in terms of SaaS maturity to the sales and marketing domain. But given a growing client interest to migrate these complex workloads like ERP or HCM to cloud, over time, that same ISV opportunity which today exists in the front office will present itself within the startup ecosystem in these other arenas. We've already begun to see this reality play out in HR over just the last 6 months to a year, as incumbents recognize the growing challenge by customer organizations as it pertains to retaining and cultivating talent. As a result, SAP's acquires startups like Swoop Talent to embed machine learning into success factors and provide clients with talent data intelligence. Likewise, ServiceNow, far from an HR incumbent today, has sought to similarly innovate its own HCM offerings to disrupt the space with the acquisition of Hitchworks, an AI-driven skills mapping and talent intelligence provider, which has since been folded into the Now platform. From a startup perspective, companies similar to that of Hitch or Swoop Talent have an opportunity to identify those tier 2 and 3 HCM pure plays who would make good partners to bring to market, cloud-native solutions that are comprised of multiple ecosystem entities. So in essence, forming their own sort of ecosystems similar to that of Salesforce's AppExchange ahead of these incumbents currently dominating the space today. While the evolution of the SaaS sales and marketing space provides an indication of where the rapidly maturing business applications and HR segments are likely headed, and then the resultant opportunity, which will then be granted to cloud startups, findings from TBR's applications customer research provide an additional layer of evidence that should excite startup executives. Specifically, in the above examples, it is clear that as the client's SaaS maturity grows for a workload, they begin to seek additional ways to use cloud to enable more discrete business processes. For instance, a client might explore how to innovate their field services operations, using, for instance, integrations between Service Cloud and frontline workers' devices to ensure the proper servicing of a client's asset in the field. Achieving that goal, though, means a greater degree of workload customization required by a customer, ensuring the integration of all the relevant systems between that of not just first party, but also a growing array of third-party systems too, while also adjusting various business rules and maintaining compliance with various regulatory standards that are relevant within whatever use case they're pursuing. In sum, as client maturity grows, customization rises, and as a result, the degree of first and third-party application scales exponentially as well. It's no surprise then that 40% of respondents in TBR's applications customer research studies stated they use 3 or more SaaS vendors today, increasingly preferring best-of-breed deployment strategies. Further, in the next 2 years, 60% of those customers also expect to increase their total number of vendors they utilize across their environment. The reasons behind these preferences are many, including the examples provided while talking through the last slide, but also because customers still remain wary of vendor lock-in. In the early days of cloud, SaaS promised to remove that very fear, but over time, SaaS incumbents have merely broadened the scope of their portfolios to address a greater array of needs, while also continually layering capabilities like AI, think back to SAP's Swoop Talent acquisition, to increase per-seat charges that the clients pay, and then in addition, increase their compute and storage needs, resulting in higher IaaS and PaaS bills. As customers' desired outcomes grow more complex, such as in the pursuit of industry solutions, no one SaaS vendor, incumbent or startup, will be able to address the totality of their needs. It will take the involvement of entities across the entire technology value chain. Understanding who these entities are, though, will be defined by that technology use case that a client is pursuing, be it IoT-enabled field servicing or intelligent inventory management. The players then needed is vastly different between the two. If ISVs can be the orchestrator of these ecosystems in their respective workload domains, bringing the necessary partners together to integrate with the incumbent's core system, over time, this will allow the startups to become incumbents on their own cloud-native workloads in which they're pursuing that are being pursued by the customers today. In short, define your own market segment by figuring out what that next need is by the client. And with that, I'll pass it back to Alan to run through the portfolio and then open it up for Q&A.
Sounds great. Thanks, Evan. Yeah, so to wrap it up, here's a view of the current portfolio. We are looking at continually adding coverage of new vendors through vendor snapshots, which are a little bit more concise analysis, but still kind of take the same TBR lens of what the business operations are and what the impact and value to the market is, as well as new market landscapes that we're currently planning for introduction coming out next year, many of which hit on some of the areas and tiers of vendors that we talked about today. So with that, I will pause and let some questions come in. I'll queue them up, and we'll go through that discussion before closing up the webinar. All right, so the first question is around the role of acquisitions we see playing in terms of these smaller vendors. I can dive in, and then any of my colleagues can join as well. Yeah, clearly acquisitions have been at play. We saw just in the security space that I touched on, Google being quite acquisitive in terms of bringing capabilities in-house. And that's not only from a portfolio expansion strategy, clearly that's a big part of it for them, but also in terms of those skills that we talked about earlier, the security services space is one of the larger aspects of the addressable market for security and cloud security in general. And, you know, I think you'll see that reflected in from the SIs and even for some of the technology providers, their acquisitions in and around security, partially focused on bringing those skills in-house, not just for the standalone portfolio, but for integrating it into the core offering and being able to have consultants that are specialists in security-focused offerings. That's all going to be very important. So I think you'll continue to see smaller acquisitions focused on those aspects. For some of the larger ones, there's always the risk of disrupting some of the core value of these agnostic, independent, multi-cloud, multi-service security vendors. And so I think in some ways that prevents, you know, broader acquisition activity within the cloud security market. Anything else from colleagues around how acquisitions could play a role in terms of these smaller pure play vendors?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of the apps market, I mean, I think we're going to continue to see these, we'll call them value add capability sort of buys, like a soup talent, something of that nature, where, you know, incumbents really just taking a solution that they're either seeing performing well in one of their partner marketplaces and deciding, okay, let's just fold this in across the, you know, the larger portfolio. If you know, think of what Microsoft did with Nuance. We've kind of yet to see it, but that NLP addition across things like Dynamics and so on will be compelling to the client. And then I think the incumbents in particular are recognizing the need to sort of engage ecosystems more, which may result in more, you know, using the partner exchange to kind of find who those companies are. And if you look at, like, SAP's adjusted their pricing or fees model for their ISV communities to kind of reduce barriers to entry. Microsoft just basically rebranded and reshuffled what they had already had from a partner exchange, which across 400,000 organizations to align more closely around, you know, biz apps, data, and modern work. So I think they recognize that value, and I think we'll see more and more that those exchanges become this way of kind of finding the right candidate.
Okay, great. And the next question is around how do the changing macroeconomic conditions impact the competitive environments in these spaces?
Yeah, I'll just start again on apps. So it's monitoring the I guess you could say commentary over the last 3 quarters from these vendors. It's just been interesting. I mean, obviously, the narrative around the challenges has only gotten worse as you move through the year. But I think what made 3Q22 different, or I guess it was technically 2Q22, was the statements by Salesforce and Workday sort of around they're seeing the client procurement processes change, where they're adding in additional layers of approval, executive approval to that process, which is kind of prolonging the deal cycle. You know, even for some of these just core workloads, like an HR solution, they need to start to, in the context of Workday, they need to have a business case to be able to kind of elicit that buy-in of the executive shareholder, which, you know, is maybe not an issue that you have when you're doing, you know, a CRM implementation or just a payroll implementation, you know, when times are good. But as the budget becomes more scrutinized, you have to be able to kind of showcase what that means to the client. And the only other thing is to monitor would be the user seat growth of some of these SaaS offerings out there. I think Microsoft's kind of saw a bit of a slowdown within I think it's the Microsoft 365 offering. So there's a bit of a moderation in that growth. And, you know, one way to look at it is, are these companies going to start, you know, maybe not buying as many seats for various solutions that they have and kind of relying on, you know, the core stakeholders to do it. They don't need to buy all of them for everybody. But the other angle to look at it too is that they do start to rationalize away some workforce. There's just going to be less need by them to then buy those licenses.
Great. Let's see. Last question that we currently have. Feel free to submit more. This question is, given the sheer breadth of Hyperscale's customer base, do you think they will be able to internally address security in terms of cost to? Wouldn't a managed security service provider be a more cost-friendly approach? Yeah, I mean, I think clearly from what we've seen so far, the hyperscales themselves not only can't, but I think in some ways don't want to be totally on the hook for the security of their customers. You know, I think they want to focus on core platform security, partner in a lot of different spaces to bring in expertise around some of the more nuanced security realms, and have that multi-vendor approach to share the risk and to kind of in some ways be a check against each other for best practices and working in tandem, orchestrated by the customer to ensure the overall security of the environment. The managed security service provider space clearly is a quickly growing segment. Managed services overall for cloud is becoming more important. More investment from customers to offload the operations and optimization of a lot of cloud assets, and I think security is certainly a big area of focus for them. So I do think that's cost effective. Yes, if you look at all the internal resources that would be required to monitor and respond and to operate from a security operations perspective. Clearly, there will be a premium for third-party providers, but I think in terms of the quality of the service and the overall risk profile, it's going to be compelling and definitely an area of continued growth going forward. Okay, that's all the questions for today. I will hand it back over to Haley to go through the wrap-up.
Thanks, Alan, and thanks, everybody. That was awesome. Thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to the team with any follow-up questions. If you have a few moments, it would be greatly appreciated if you could fill out the survey that's going to pop up on your screens. The replay version of today's webcast will be available after the event and will be sent out to all of you via email. To view a list of our upcoming and past webinars, you can do that at tbri.com. And be sure to join us on Thursday, December 1st for how to use objective data metrics to benchmark your Alliance performance. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.